We're going to look at the Kit 1, Theme A, the I-Y conventions. Melvin calls this the basic pattern, which makes me think there's a more complex pattern, but I'm not sure. This was a lesson last year that I think spoke to a lot of people when we met with Pete. It was just like, oh, that's cool. And it kind of got us seeing how to teach this stuff. So I'm going to jump right in with the big ideas. The letters I and Y are a team. They can swap places with one another, but sometimes they don't. The third big idea is that there are simple patterns which govern these modalities, which basically means we can figure out when and why you use Y and I. The theme teaches that I and Y are mutually interchangeable according to simple patterns. Vowel plus Y forms an unchangeable letter string. You must avoid writing I plus I in an English word. We get to add in a law this time, and one of our first sessions, I had written up the first English spelling law, and I actually put a 1 here, and I started thinking, I'm not sure there's an order, so I went back and just put bullets. And so our new English spelling law is that no complete English word can end with the letter I. And it's very important that kids understand this in its entirety, because each of these words matter in the law. Melvin gives us some words to sort of test it out on. The first word is ski. Well, it ends in an I. But what we know is that ski is not actually an English word. It's a Norwegian word. So it isn't English, so it doesn't affect the same law, the same way. Spaghetti is the same thing, which I think for some of our kids, they'd be shocked to find out spaghetti is not an English word. Same reason. Taxi is an interesting word because it's, I believe, what Melvin calls a clip, which is sort of like an abbreviation almost of another word. So taxi is the shortened form of taximeter, and it's actually 2 words, taximeter cabriolet. So we now call it taxi, and we write it that way. But it really, the word taximeter is where the I comes in. That's where it's at. So using this to help kids understand the law is going to be very important, because they need to understand that taxi is not a complete word. So it can end in an I. And these two, although they are complete, they're not English. Okay? Let's see. The other thing is to make sure that kids do still have a handle, or if they're still getting there, get a handle on the vowels. And using the vowel hand, A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y. This is a pattern that also gets heavily utilized in this theme because it shows how I and Y work together. And later on, or last year if you remember, we also talked about how A and E work together and O and U work together. So this is a nice, possibly laminatable form that you want to have handy for kids. Melvin gives some words in the theme that you can talk about how they are interchangeable and how I and Y can both make the long I sound, or I and Y can both make a short I sound. And then we want to investigate the when and why from there. So let me move right into this. Another really good tactile idea, and I think this is what we liked and spoke to us last year, was the idea that, and I have to make sure my handy drawing, that my hand is facing the right way, there can be a Y at the beginning of a word, or a Y at the end of the word, but there are only 3 good reasons why there would be a Y in the middle of the word. And this tactileness with kids, they're going to really pick up on it. So you start the theme by talking about the Y's that are changed, how you can have a Y and how the I changes to a Y, or Y to an I, by doing some practice with some matrices. The first example that he gives is the word cry, and he works through that. One thing I wanted to point out that I think this is the first theme we've encountered it shows up in, is if there is a word that's written with an asterisk, we're putting the asterisk to say we know this isn't correct. We're using it as a model. So kids can understand that everybody knows how to spell cry, but we're investigating the word further to learn something else. So by putting the asterisk, we're indicating we know it's not right. So he tests cry by adding a suffix that has a vowel suffix to it. The suffix ed means that Y is no longer going to be the end of the word, so we change the Y to I and add ed. I'll do the whole word sum. CRY plus ed is rewritten as, check the joins, CR, change the Y to I, ed, cried. What Karen and I were just talking about is this handy tool. This is a piece of what Melvin calls the suffix checker. And the suffix checker is this, and it's fantastic. And the best part about it is we don't just hand this out, but we break it down into little pieces in these themes. So this is one of the first pieces of the vowel suffix checker. You could easily just put this out, give it to kids like this. I blew it up into a poster thinking about younger grades, that maybe being able to come up and touch the poster may even be handy. But basically you start, and again, we haven't gotten to vowel suffixing yet, but in this instance, if you want to showcase this or just talk them through one example, it won't hurt anybody for the next theme that we're doing where we really get into this. But basically, with a word that ends in Y, is there a vowel letter before the Y? So you ask and answer questions, and it tells you whether or not you can just add the suffix or if the Y has to change to an I. Kids really internalize the pattern, so this is going to become very handy. And I think having a poster of it, or at least this up somewhere where they can touch it and use it or in their books, will be important, possibly though for the next themes. One of the other things that Melvin talked about was there is a fallacy that we as adults may have to unlearn, and that's the idea that IES is a suffix. It is not. And so we can no longer say cross off the Y and add IES. It's not a suffix in and of itself. So if you were taught that way or used to teach that way, we're going to have to watch ourselves on that. The Y is actually changing before the addition of the suffix ES. These are some handouts that are in the theme that you could use to practice with, and also some more just indicators of what we're learning. So we're moving now into these 3 good reasons. The first good reason, we know we can have a Y at the beginning of the word or a Y at the end of the word, but there are only 3 good reasons why we can have a Y in the middle. And the first good reason is because if the Y is part of a digraph, a vowel digraph, we can't split it apart. The Y and the other vowel work in tandem, and so if we break them up, they won't work anymore. And you can practice some of these vowel digraph teams. He's also given us some here to talk about when we add a suffix to these words, how does it change it? But these allow us to have a Y in the middle of the word. The second good reason is that you must avoid writing 2 I's in an English word, in the middle of an English word, because the 2 I's together could be confused as a U by the way they're written. So we try to avoid doing that. And the example that he gives is to take the word copy and add the vowel suffix ed to it. The I changes into, C-O-P-Y plus ed is C-O-P, change the Y to I, ed. For this one though, with the addition of a vowel suffix that has an I, when we rewrite it, you can see the asterisk, I know this is going to be wrong, what it would come out as is C-O-P-I-I-N-G, but we know that we don't put 2 Y's in the middle of a word, so we retain the Y and add the vowel suffix. And there could be, and one of the things that Pete would recommend, is if this doesn't feel good to you, try it with another word. Keep practicing it on other words, and they've given you some here like fancy, berry. Try it out with those words, and you'll see how we're not going to break that apart because you'd end up with 2 I's to practice. The third reason, and Melvin shows in the theme, he talks about the first 2 and then kind of later talks about the third. I don't really know why, but the third good reason is that if the words are as a compound word, you would retain the Y. And that's because the base itself needs to stay intact. So the example that he showed was anybody. We wouldn't change the Y to an I here because it would change the base. And we need the base in a compound word because a compound word is actually the 2 bases that retain some of their meaning. And one of the things that struck me from Pete's last session I was in was the idea that kids and adults can be confused on what a base is. And Heather and I did this too. But like carpet is not a base because there's no retention of meaning when you put those 2 things together. So this is the third and final reason why you keep an I. Some of the questions that might come up from your kids, a word like dying, and that's why die has a Y in the middle, and that's because the base is D-I-E. Same thing, if we took off the E, we would end up with 2 I's. We don't have that, so we retain the 1 I, then changes to a Y. Proper nouns, names of places, names of people. We don't follow the same rules, so we have to ask ourselves, is it a proper noun before we apply these rules? And the final one that I think kids probably would ask about, and is kind of cool, is the word high. High ends in an I, even though we're saying from our law that we don't do that in English. But actually high is a contraction of haya, which is almost an abbreviation of how are you. It's just sort of a term that has evolved, and we leave the I there.